So this is the removal of the housing, bearing housing on an AR230 07. This is the bearing housing plate that mounts to the ass end there. It's already removed, but how I got that removed was undoing those 3 bolts, and then coming over to the exhaust, loosening these up. As you see, it slid back a little bit, undoing my plug wires that are just sitting resting over here, and then undoing the 8 bolts that hold the motor mounts, the 8 bolts, and then put some WD-40 on the floor to get a nice smooth transition, and then slid it back just about an inch, and it came right out. That's it. That's simple.
I'm gonna rock this back and forth. You'll see this. I have a disconnect. This is worn. Okay, I looked at this a couple times. I can see that the factory seal is recessed in the housing. And I look at my new seal, it's proud. So I can't measure to that, right? That's not accurate. This fit right here does not touch the hull. So that does not really give me a good accurate position on where the coupling would be. So what I want is I want a way to measure to this flange that mounts to the hull and this flange. So what I'm gonna do, got a piece of key stock, and I am going to measure from here to here. So the top surface down, and that way I can do this a couple different ways and make sure I'm pretty accurate. I'll measure from here to here. So I get 3 points, and when I'm done doing this, I should be pretty close to how I took this out versus how I put this in. I looked at this a couple times to figure out how to measure and with accuracy to make sure when I press the new shaft in, it protrudes the same amount. But then I took a look up at the top, and there's a line struck on the factory shaft. That line, as I roll this over, lines up perfectly with the top of the housing. So that's gonna be my target. I'm gonna straight edge that and make sure that that is dead on, but that looks like how I'm gonna repeat assembly. Pulling the shaft out and putting the new one in. So to show this a little better, I have some key stock. All right, I'm gonna lay this across the top, hold that down, and you can see that my line, it's hard to see, but that basically a straight edge over to my line. It's pretty much dead on. That easy. All right. So we've got the coupling shaft out. I'm going to clean this up, and we're going to press this one into the seals this way. And this top mark here, that's what I have my eye on. That's going to have to line up flat with this surface here. To that. So for this, I'm going to use another socket. This will allow the shaft to come up through here. All right, I'm going to be pressing in from this side. All right, so now we've got our new shaft pressed into the new bearing. And you can see it really comes down to, it doesn't matter how far you push this in. What matters is your ability to realign the engine afterwards. That's why you want to get this pretty close. You have a soft coupling in here, and as this changes position, that's going to open or restrict your gap in your coupling, which you want to have a little bit of clearance in that per the manual. So if you're off a little bit, as long as you're past the chamfered edge on that shaft, it really doesn't matter. However, you want to be as close as possible so that you don't have to realign your engine. So as you can see here, you can pretty much strike a line right down this plane, and I'm on my mark. Am I within 30 thousandths? Probably. I think that's going to be good enough because there's no other really good way to measure this, especially since I'm going from one bearing to another.
So if we go to our instruction manual, chapter 6-7, this is where the coupling dimension is located and also gives us some illustrations of how this goes together. It's kind of tough to see, but over on the right-hand side, we have a cross-sectional illustration showing how far the shaft protrudes past the edge of the flange of that bearing, and that is item B. So that tells us how far the shaft sticks out relative to the flange. So if I scroll down to chapter 6-8, I go down a little bit, we look for distance B. Yep, that's 6-8. And we go to distance B, and that shows us that the shaft will be proud to the flange. It'll stick out by 0.37 to 0.41 inches. So they're giving us 40 thousandths of play in that range. And again, it comes down to being very close to where we were before on alignment, on axial alignment for the coupling, so that we are left with enough room in the hold down bolts for the engine to get ourselves back in position so that we can give ourselves clearance for the rubber coupling. The manual calls for 0.8 inches to 0.157 inches, so that's a pretty big range on the gap for the rubber inside that coupling.
So I clamped off the tubing that goes into that Zerk fitting that's on the pump, which is a Zerk fitting back there. I clamped it off and squeezed some grease in it to make sure that this line's fully filled with grease. I did not apply grease in there, assuming that that's already pre-packed because it's a sealed device. So I'm going to connect that now that I know the tubing is filled with grease. So added some marine grease to the main spline shaft hole. Also put some grease down in the hole that it fits in, the direct hole. Put some RTV around that seal, and now I'm getting ready to mount it in there. The housing bearing is mounted and ready to get mounted up with the cup link. So motor has to be moved back in place. So everything is all ready to go. Just got to remount the motor. Looks good. So all mounting bolts for all the feet are tightened up. How I did that was one at a time with some WD-40 so it would slide around, and just put a couple of threads on each one of them so all 8 were lined up and mounted, and then took one out by one out, put Loctite in and put it down there and snugged it up ever so slightly, and then gave it a little wiggle, looked at the back to make sure that we were pretty close on our gaps over there per spec, and then snugged them up and tightened it up, and she's ready to rock and roll.